This is a story I have not told in full before, and for good reason. I grew up in a town that people only mentioned in half jokes and lowered voices, a place where abandoned storefronts and sagging porches kept the kind of secrets that make your stomach go cold. The first time I felt the town watching me, it was late summer on a narrow street that smelled of diesel and wet concrete. I was with a rotating group of friends who treated danger like a dare. Mark, the daredevil, Lena, the planner, Carlos, the lookout, Jamie, the driver, and me, the one who always tried to make sense of what came after. Our modus operandi was simple and stupid. Find a place with a fence or a broken window, slip inside, photograph something no one should see, and leave before the lights came on. That night, we were hunting an old textile mill that everyone said was haunted. We told ourselves it was curiosity and adrenaline, a way to push back against small-town boredom. But the first anomaly came faster than any of us expected. A symbol scrawled on a locker that did not belong to any record of the town. Fresh paint over rust. A pentagram that smelled faintly of oil and paint thinner. Something about it felt personal, like it had been left there for us to find. I remember thinking then that the rest of the night would change how we walked through the town forever. If you have ever done something reckless because your friends laughed, you will understand that knot of shame and adrenaline. This happened a little over 7 years ago. I will try to build a picture for you so you can feel the place the way I did, because the town itself is a character in these accounts. My backstory matters for that context. I grew up in a house at the edge of the industrial ward, the kind of place where the roof leaked in patterns you could time with a clock, and neighbors shouted across yards more than they called for company. My father worked nights at a logistics center. My mother took short shifts as a delivery scheduler, and I learned early that quiet often meant work, and work often meant absence. I was 19 when the first of these 3 stories began, a mix of resentment and bravado making me take risks to feel seen. School had left me with a pack of acquaintances who were good at bad ideas. Mark, who thought height was a personality trait, Lena, who kept a small notebook for plans, Carlos, who nodded and watched while suspicion ran like a thread through his face, Jamie, a few years older, who drove us and said the right things to calm us when we were jittery. I had a sense that this town would always be the place I could escape from, but the reality was that the town's edges folded back in on me. That upbringing is what taught me to notice small signs, a light left burning in an empty house, a neighbor's dog that did not bark, the way a window would reflect moonlight like a watching eye. I learned to carry a backpack with a flashlight, a bottle, a first aid kit, and a camera. I learned not to trust a voice in the dark. I learned the textures of fear. All of that mattered when we decided to spend an entire night chasing rumors and unlocked doors. The first descent into the mill was loud in my memory, every sense turned up. The mill sat 3 blocks from the river, its brick face pocked and stained, tall broken windows like missing teeth. The air at the fence smelled of river rot and someone burning trash. We climbed the rusting ladder, my palms smelling of sweat and metal. Lena's flashlight cut a thin cone through the dust motes. Inside, the main floor swallowed our light. There were rows of machinery fossilized in rust, conveyor belts hanging like dead vines, and the sound of our footsteps echoed with a wet, hollow ring. We split up, whispering as if the building might overhear. Carlos stayed by the entrance, eyes sweeping. Mark and I went toward a stairwell that led to the offices, and Jamie lingered near a doorway that opened toward the loading docks. Then we found the lockers. One locker door hung open, fresh paint smudged on its edge. On the inside of the door, a pentagram had been painted with quick, wet strokes. The paint still glistened. I touched it with my glove and felt tackiness and the faint chemical sting of fenner. "Whose backpack was in the main room earlier?" Mark asked. "Frank's," I said, but our names kept changing like a rolling tide. We had a habit of borrowing items and identities when we wanted to be blunt. The first odd thing was not the symbol alone, it was the smell that came with it. A peppermint-scented smoke that did not belong to factory dust. That small wrongness made the hair on my arm stand up. We tried to laugh and make it a joke, the way teenagers will, but the humor was thin. Lena said in a low voice, "We should leave this." Carlos whispered that he had seen lights outside the loading bay, but we thought it was patrol. Jamie kept checking his phone as if reception could decide whether we were in danger. The dialogue that followed between us was protracted, the kind of back and forth that stretched 5 or 6 exchanges, where each line tried to reassert normality. "We came for photos," I said. "We can take one and go," Mark replied. "It feels wrong," Lena said. "We came this far," Jamie insisted. Carlos, eyes on the door, said simply, "I don't like this." The exchange was small, but it lengthened, each of us layering rationales and doubts until the group's decision hung on a thread. That exchange was our first big mistake. It was our clustering of doubts and bravado that kept us moving deeper into the building. In the stairwell, a faint scraping sound began, not like metal settling, but like something dragging across concrete. Then a whisper, or the wind compressed into an almost voice. For the first time that night, none of us cracked a joke. The building felt alive in some way that had nothing to do with heat or animals. As we pushed further, we started to notice signs that this was more than an abandoned site. There were items that looked recently placed. A child's shoe, a plastic bag with an unfamiliar brand of candy, a single chair set in the center of a room facing outward. On a rusting table, we found a note folded into thirds, the handwriting quick and erratic. "This is not a game," it said. The rational part of me cataloged options: vandals, a local kid using the place as a hideout, a group staging an art piece. Mark insisted we keep going to the roof where graffiti and a view of the river would make good shots. Lena argued we document the note and leave. Carlos moved like a patrolman, checking angles and windows, voice clipped when he said, "There are footprints heading to the basement." That line should have been enough to call the night. Instead, our curiosity turned into a plan to split up, the worst possible decision for a group like ours. We debated quietly, trading 5 more lines that were equal parts bravado and bargaining. "We stay together," Jamie said. "We stay together," I repeated. But then Mark peeled away toward a stair labeled basement and disappeared into throat of darkness. Moment of tension 1. For almost 550 characters, let me slow this down. The basement air hit me like an open mouth, damp and cold, the light from my flashlight drumming on beads of condensation. Each footfall sloshed faintly on pooled oil. Mark's silhouette swallowed up the pool of my light, and then his voice came back, thin and far. The sound of something hitting metal echoed, a hollow clang like a dropped wrench. My breath came out loud, a ragged sound that seemed too big for my chest. The room smelled of bleach and something sweet like cough syrup. I remember thinking, absurdly, that if this were a movie, we would have already left. Instead, we kept moving toward a clump of darkness, and the scraping became unmistakable, like nails on concrete. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. When Mark moved closer to a row of covered machines, he set off a small chain of events that none of us could unmake. He pulled a tarp back and found a small shrine, a plastic figurine half buried in dust, a coil of twine, and under the figurine a scrap of fabric with a print I recognized from a jacket Lena had worn the night before. Week before at the intersection. The name tag sewn inside was not ours. It was a name from a missing persons report we'd all seen once in a local bar, a face on a flyer tacked to a pole. For a moment, there was silence so complete I could hear my own ears. "We should call this in," Lena said, voice shaking. Mark reached out and touched the fabric, and when he moved his hand away, a smear of paint that matched the pentagram was on his fingers. He laughed once, too loud. "This is insane," he said. "We have to get out." That rush toward the exit broke into a series of hurried, clipped lines, with little room for reason. "Now," Carlos said. "Now," Jamie echoed. We ran, not feeling especially brave, just keenly aware that the building had a patience we did not. We made it out to the alley with lungs burning and hearts high, and the streets outside looked washed and familiar. The car engine was a relief, a physical symbol of return to order. But even as we sped away, Lena held up her notebook and showed us a quick sketch she had made of the locker symbol. "This isn't graffiti," she said. "It's like a mark, like somebody marks their territory." That thought lodged in the back of my skull. That first night set the tone for the next months. Small discoveries, missing items from friends' houses, strange noises at windows, and the slow realization that the town's empty places were not so empty. We told the police what we had found. Officer Ruiz, a patrol officer who had a habit of sighing before he took notes, said he would file a report, but that without more evidence, they could do little. We left a copy of Lena's sketch at the station. The official file would be thin paper in a drawer, but the smear of paint on Mark's hand would not wash off for 2 days. After that first story settled into our lives like a sleeping animal, the pattern repeated in different forms. The second descent was into a boarded-up chapel on the hill, a place with a rusted fence and a rumor that people who had been too loud in life came back to sit in the pews. We went there months later, thinking ourselves smarter and more careful. The chapel had a locked gate and a dog-eared sign warning of trespassers. It was November, and the wind had a high, thin sound like a whistle through a mailbox. We crept through a gap in the fence, the metal cutting our palms, and slid along the mossy stone wall toward the side door. The smell inside was resin and candle wax. We stepped on broken stained glass that crunched like brittle sugar. The altar had been stripped, but there were items left in odd order. A single child's shoe on the first step, dried flowers at the base of a column, and on a pew, a backpack with our town's local brand tag still visible. We debated again, and this time we argued longer. "Last time we almost got ourselves in trouble," Lena said, voice small. "We should call the manager." Jamie countered that the fence told a different story. The fence invited you to climb it. Officer Hargrove from the community patrol was named in a caller's log we had seen once, and we thought about mentioning her name to lend weight to a decision to leave. Instead, we let curiosity and a flawed sense of ownership guide us. Scene with extended dialogue in the chapel. 5 to 7 exchanges unfolded where each line built and then eroded confidence. "Who would leave a backpack here?" I asked, rubbing my cold hands together. "Maybe someone took shelter," Carlos suggested. "Maybe it's set up," Mark said, voice low. Lena leaned close, whispering, "There's a smell, like oil and peppermint again." Jamie said, "If it's set up, who would want to scare us?" I said, "If it's set up, it's working." Carlos glanced at the chapel door. "What if someone's still inside?" Mark's laugh fell away. "We didn't think about that," he said. That exchange solidified our next action. We were going to open the backpack together and check its contents, as if the act of opening would prove the world made sense. We opened the backpack to find a small, sealed envelope with no return address. A Polaroid picture folded inside showing the 3 of us leaving the mill months earlier, and a scrap of paper with 3 times written. The Polaroid had not been taken that night. The photo had been taken within the last hour because the dew on the coat in the picture still had bead-like condensation. The handwriting on the scrap was a shorthand none of us recognized, a looping script that arched like a whisper. The air grew thicker. A sound started behind us, slow and wet, like something scraping across the wooden floor of the vestry. We turned. No one was there, but the back door was shut and the padlock hung open, swinging with a small, deliberate rhythm. Moment of tension, too. For roughly 520 characters, the fear stretched like an elastic band. The chapel's lamp browned the dust into gold. The scraping continued, then stopped. The silence pressed in, filling our ears with the noise of our own blood. My flashlight skimmed over the altar edge and found a cluster of small symbols carved into the wood, the same pentagram motif we had seen at the mill. My hands were cold enough to ache. Lena's whisper came to me like an accusation. We should have never come back here. The door clicked as if tested. Our breaths synchronized into a quick, panicked rhythm. It felt like the building was measuring us with a patient eye. We ran from the chapel faster than before, stumbling through the gap in the fence, cutting palms, jeans on rust. Jamie swore under his breath. Mark's voice pitched higher than I had ever heard. We were hyper-aware of windows, of curtains that might twitch. When we reached the truck, I noticed a smear on the side window, too high for any of us to reach from inside. It looked like paint, but wet with night. The police were called again. Officer Hargrove took our statements in a kind but businesslike tone and promised to increase patrols, but the town's patrols were sparse and the officers had other calls. She looked at Lena's and my faces and said, "You kids need to stop tempting trouble." Her tone was not harsh exactly, more resigned. The feedback we got from authority figures was a mix of skepticism and procedural coolness. That gap between our terror and the police's paper forms widened into a gulf we would come to know well. Between and after these incidents, we developed theories and arguments. I remember nights at Jenna's bar where patrons named other disappearances, where Mrs. Hargrove, the librarian, would pull down a stack of news clippings and pass them around under table light. One theory was ritualistic, the pentagram as a mark of claim. Another was practical, local gangs using abandoned structures for meetings and intimidation, leaving marks to discourage interlopers. Mark argued for a human culprit who thrived on attention. Lena posited a misinterpreted art collective. We sketched timelines, compared the smudges of paint, compared the brands on stray backpacks, and found an unwelcome pattern. Markings near every place youths used to gather, near the fence lines, near roofs and basements. The debate happened in the open and in whispers, sometimes in shouting matches. "If someone is targeting us, why our town and why now?" I asked one night. Officer Ruiz said, "Small towns have small secrets, they never stay small." That line kept returning to me like a tide. At around the 30% mark of what I can only call our collective nightmare, I want to pause and ask you something personal, because this community has always been a place where stories matter. I know listening to this has made you pull at your shirt or glance at a window, and that is normal. If you have a story like this, or even a small moment when a place in your town felt wrong, I want you to share it below. Start your comment with one word, location. Then tell the brief outline of what happened and when. The goal is simple, to give us a map of small things that add up. Your comments have helped people before in this channel. They linked a photo to a missing dog case, an anonymous tip to an officer who followed up, and a neighbor to someone who needed a ride. Commenting doesn't mean you are inviting danger. It means you are making a public ledger that could help someone else. If you are worried about being identified, say location and, most of all, reading your experiences has a grounding effect. It is how we remind ourselves we are not the only ones who have felt a town watch us. Now, back to that night. The third and most personal story unfolded differently because it brought the danger into my home. After months of fragmented incidents, marks on the fence, toys left on stoops, a package of mail opened and rearranged in a neighbor's yard, things escalated to a point where the marks began to feel like messages. One late winter morning, I came home from a night shift and found my windows slightly ajar. The blinds were not crooked like in a draft. They had been moved with a purpose, as if someone had looked in and then left a small proof of presence. Inside, the coffee on the kitchen counter had been moved 2 inches to the left. My backpack sat on the couch with a single Polaroid on top of it. The photo was of the front of our house taken from the street, and someone had scribbled a line across the top of the image, "We see you." I held that photo and felt a cold that was not weather. I called Carlos, who lived a block over, and he came and sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched. We spoke in short sentences, and each exchange felt like a negotiation with fear. "You called the cops?" he asked. "I called, yes," I said. "They asked if anything was missing." "Anything?" he said.
Some things are never listed as missing, I answered. That evening, after the sun dropped and the streetlights came on lazy and uncertain, I sat watching the window across the street where Mrs. Bellamy kept a light on and a cat that stared like an indifferent guardian. The town felt smaller and more layered. I heard someone out in the yard, a soft footfall that sounded like they were stepping on dry leaves. I moved stealthily to the door and peeked through the peephole. There was a tall figure standing under the porch light of the house across the street, holding something long and thin, perhaps a stick, perhaps nothing. The shape was backlit, a silhouette. I did not open the door. Instead, I whispered to Lena, and she suggested calling Officer Ruiz again. When the patrol car did arrive, it rolled by in a slow sweep and did not stop. We were told to lock doors and file a report. That night, I dreamed of hands pressing under a window, slow and patient as an animal pressing for scent. The escalation culminated in a confrontation that changed us irrevocably. One night when the sky was a flat black and the snow made sound carry, I was returning to the car after grabbing supplies for a friend who was sick. The alley behind the grocery was narrow, and my breath showed in white bands. There was
I froze. From the edge of the lot, someone called my name. "Hey, you!" said a voice so precise I recognized it as a neighbor I had seen in early morning shifts, Tony, who often did the night rounds collecting bottles. I relaxed, stepped forward, and then the world tilted. Tony's face was pale and his pupils dilated. He held out a hand with a matchbox. "You dropped this," he said, and his voice had a rasp. I took the matchbox and in that instant glimpsed something behind him moving like a shadow flaring against the fence. Another figure stepped out, and then another, indistinct and layered, like leaves moving. The town had become an audience, and we were the performers trapped on stage. Moment attention 3. For around 560 characters, the seconds stretched thick. The second figure spoke, and the whistle sound grew into a hum low in my teeth. "Where do you sleep, really?" the voice asked. Fear narrowed every thought. My mouth tasted of metal. In that small breath, the alley seemed to press in from both sides, chain-link fence like teeth. For a beat, I considered running, but running would draw attention, and whatever was behind us could have been waiting for that exact movement. I kept my eyes on Tony, seeking recognition, something that would tell me this was a neighbor's prank. His stare did not change. It settled, and I felt a physical weight in my chest, as if the night itself had decided to sit on my ribs. I did not get physically assaulted that night, but what followed was worse in its subtlety. There were more pictures, more symbols, and for a while I woke up expecting to find someone had rifled through my toothbrush cup. We changed locks, installed extra lights, and began to carry personal alarms in our pockets. There were procedural things to do, and I will give you a short technical description of what we did because it might help someone listening who finds themselves in a similar place. We documented everything with timestamps and photos, saved message threads with delivery apps, filed police reports with copies of all evidence, requested patrol logs for the periods we reported incidents, and we installed a small exterior camera focused on the porch. We labeled each item and secured a chain of custody for each piece of physical evidence when handing it to the officer, so nothing would be dismissed as misremembered. That process felt bureaucratic and cold, but it gave us an outline of control. In the weeks that followed, we became investigators in a way. We collected names and tied them to sightings. Officer Ruiz became a reluctant ally. Tony, the man in the alley, was questioned and released. He claimed to have been out looking for a lost dog. Mrs. Hargrove from the library brought us old town records and a clipping about a fire decades earlier at a textile annex where a caretaker had disappeared and whose case was never fully closed. That file mentioned strange marks left on doors and a whispered warning by local teens that the place would claim what it needed. We cross-referenced dates and small thefts, and patterns emerged like the slow drip of water shaping stone. Still, some evidence resisted explanation. The pentagram motif did not appear on any old official report. The symbols resembled a child's attempt at art more than anything ritualistic, but the placement suggested intent in communication. There were moments of tension we slowed down and examined carefully for their precision and impact. One such moment was when Lena and I walked the river path at midnight because she thought she saw footprints that matched patterns from the mill. We followed a line of fresh tracks toward a rusted bench and found a collection of small painted stones, 8 set like a marker. I describe it in a slow paragraph of about 580 characters so you can feel the rhythm. The stones were damp and glossy in the lantern light, each painted with a little symbol that looked like a child's game. My hands trembled as I picked one up. It felt warm, as if someone had just held it. The air smelled of river algae and the faint sweet tang of breath mints. In the distance, a dog barked once, and then everything settled into a stillness that made my ears ring. Lena's whisper was more devastating than any shout. "They know where we walk," she said. We tried to bring in outside help. A small investigative journalist from the county paper named Beth came down and spent long nights with us, cross-referencing public records, knocking on doors, and talking to older residents like Mrs. Hargrove and an ex-security guard named Tony who had worked at the mill. Beth produced a timeline and published a short piece that forced the police to reopen stale reports. That brought pressure. There were interviews, camera flashes, and then a backslide to mundanity when the leads dried. The town's attention span was finite. The local boss at the mill complex, an owner named Mr. Klein, issued a denial that rioters were using his properties. The delivery drivers we spoke to said they'd seen nothing but kids and trespassers. The police forms gathered dust in a box labeled open and closed in equal measures. We argued and fractured under the strain. Some of the group wanted to leave town to escape the pattern, and others wanted to stay and turn up the heat on whoever was responsible. Mark wanted to confront the unknown. Lena wanted evidence. Jamie wanted to move away and find a city where stray marks meant less. Carlos tried to keep everyone centered and ended up burned by being the mediator. These were people I named with affection and reproach because their choices mattered. Mark acted like he could outrun consequence. Lena cataloged everything with obsessive care. Carlos watched for signs. Jamie tried to keep plan and car keys ready. Beth took the paper clippings and turned them into narrative. Officer Ruiz wrote the reports. Mrs. Hargrove dug through archives. Tony, the ex-guard, gave us names. That network of names and actions was how our story stayed tethered to reality, even when events felt surreal. In the end, there was no neat arrest or cinematic reveal that tied all the threads together. There were small victories. A neighbor who had felt threatened enough to install a camera caught motion at 2:14 a.m. on a rainy night, showing a silhouette moving along a fence line. The footage was grainy and unhelpful in prosecutorial terms, but it showed timing and consistency. A patrol increased in response, and for a week the night felt less like teeth and more like a murmur. Yet the marks continued in more subtle ways. Someone rearranged a memorial at the river, left a single shoe at the base of the mill's smokestack, and once, cruelest of all, someone delivered an anonymous package to the front step that contained a child's drawing of the three of us laughing with our faces crossed out. After that, plans to stay evaporated. People left in drips and then a trickle. Jamie moved to a city with a transit system. Mark got a job far away that required early morning shifts. Lena and I stayed longer, holding on to the idea that staying might mean answers. But eventually, we too packed backpacks and left on a rainy afternoon. Epilogue. In time. 1 month later, I had rented a small apartment 2 towns over. The silence here is different, not like the empty spaces back home, but like a neutral field. I still check locks twice. I startle at delivery knocks and the casual way a postman will stand in a doorway and look in. I keep a camera app open in my pocket. I talk to Lena twice a week. She takes photographs of abandoned places and blogs under a pseudonym. Chief among the changes is that I learned to trust my gut more than my need to be brave in front of friends.
3 months after the first events, Officer Ruiz called to tell us that a person of interest had been stopped for a different crime in another county, and that some items found in the suspect's vehicle matched materials we had documented. It was not a clean link, but it felt like a thread. For a while, we thought that thread might tie everything together. 6 months later, the thread frayed. The suspect's case stalled, evidence was circumstantial, and testimony unreliable. The town's fear did not disappear overnight. People returned to fences and roofs and basements and watched with a wary, wiser eye. We learned in those months to organize community patrols, to share home camera footage, and to leave a record of odd occurrences with the police station and with Beth's ongoing notes. The community came together in small, practical ways. Neighborhood watch signs, a local forum thread where people posted names and times, and a drop box at the library where people left anonymous tips. In private, those 3 future points changed how we acted. 1 month taught us to secure our spaces. 3 months taught us to document everything, and 6 months taught us to rely on a network where anonymity could still produce accountability. That epilogue for us was messy and slow and ultimately human. There are lessons here I want to leave you with, not as a moralizing lecture, but as practical truths born out of what frightened us. First, pay attention to small wrongnesses: a strange smell, a moved coffee cup, a mark on a fence. Second, document everything immediately with timestamps and photographs. Third, name names and keep records. Community memory is a useful thing. Fourth, do not go alone into places that feel wrong. Taking a picture is less risky than becoming another item in a mystery. And finally, if you are part of an online community, share responsibly. The map of weirdness we created helped us and others. If this story got under your skin, please comment with location and a short outline so this map grows. If this made you think of something, tell us below. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us. We are collecting these small, strange events to make sense of the places we live. I close with honesty. Some nights I still wake and check the window. I still carry a small penknife and the weight of what we did and did not do. The town keeps its secrets in layers, in abandoned furnaces and in shoes left at porches. Sometimes you can leave a place, but you cannot always leave what it taught you. If anything from these 3 tales lingers with you, let it be a reminder that small towns are full of human kindness and stubborn survival, but they can also hide slow, patient things that insist on being seen. Some doors ought to remain closed, some roofs are better left undisturbed, and some memories are heavier than we know. If you have a story or a detail to add, write location and share. We read every single one. Some doors should stay locked, and some memories should stay with the people who can keep them safe.